I never thought my career would end with a cardboard box and a security escort. But there I was, watching Madison film the whole humiliating scene on her iPhone while laughing. "For the family group chat," she said, like my professional collapse. Was just content for her entertainment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 4 months later, I was sitting across from her boss at a company gala as he raised his glass and called me the most promising CEO he'd encountered in a decade. The look on her face was worth every sleepless night, every rejection email, and every dime of my savings I'd gambled on myself. But that moment wasn't really about revenge. It was about something I had to lose everything to find. My voice. It was a rainy Tuesday in Seattle when everything fell apart. The sky outside my office window was the color of static, that particular northwest gray that seems to seep into your bones. I'd been at TechForward for 6 years, working my way up from entry-level programmer to project lead on our flagship data visualization platform. The morning had started like any other. Coffee stains on reports, back-to-back meetings, and the familiar knot of tension between my shoulder blades. Marcus Wade, my boss, stopped by my desk at 3:17 p.m. I remember checking the time because I'd just submitted the quarterly report, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. "Emily," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Can I see you in the conference room?" I followed him down the hallway, past the glass-walled offices where colleagues glanced up, then quickly away. Something cold settled in my stomach. In the conference room, a woman from HR I'd never met sat with a folder and a practiced neutral expression. It took exactly 8 minutes for 6 years of dedication to be erased. Budget cuts, restructuring. Nothing personal. My project's being absorbed by other teams. 2 weeks severance. All the standard corporate euphemisms for, "We don't need you anymore." "You can pack your personal items," the HR woman said, sliding a cardboard box across the table. "Security will escort you out." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded, feeling strangely hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left just enough to maintain the outline of a person. I packed methodically. Family photo, spare sweater, the small jade plant I'd kept alive against all odds. The things that made this sterile space feel like somewhere I belonged. As I walked through the open office, eyes down, box in arms, a familiar laugh cut through the uncomfortable silence. Madison stood by the reception desk, dressed in one of her designer suits, camel coat draped perfectly over her arm. She wasn't supposed to be there. She worked at Reynolds Innovations across town. But there she was, phone raised, recording my exit like it was a scene from a reality show she couldn't wait to share. "Mom and Dad won't believe this," she said, following me to the elevator. "The golden child finally falls. Do you need me to spot you rent money?" I stepped into the elevator, staring straight ahead as the doors closed on her smirking face. The security guard beside me shifted uncomfortably. "Family, huh?" he murmured sympathetically. "Something like that," I replied. By the time I reached my apartment, the video was already circulating in our family group chat. Dad had responded with a worried face emoji. Mom with a simple, "Oh dear." What hurt most wasn't Madison's cruelty. That was nothing new. But the silence from everyone else. No one called to check if I was okay. No one defended me. It was as if my entire family had decided my professional failure confirmed what they'd always suspected. Madison was the successful daughter, and I was just trying. I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the refrigerator, and finally let the tears come. Not delicate cinematic tears, but ugly body-shaking sobs that left my face swollen and my throat raw. Through the blur, I scrolled through job listings, already knowing what I'd find. Seattle's tech scene was contracting. Hiring freezes everywhere. My specialized skills suddenly seemed useless, like knowing how to repair typewriters in a world of computers. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Family dinner Sunday. Mom says come if you're up for it. No pressure if it's too soon after, you know. I stared at those words for a long time. The fake concern, the casual reminder of my failure, the subtle implication that my absence would be attributed to shame rather than choice. My thumb hovered over the screen. I should have declined. Should have protected myself. Instead, I typed, I'll be there. Some masochistic part of me needed to see if anyone would actually ask if I was okay when we were face to face. If anyone would offer real help instead of performative concern. I needed to know if I still had a place at that table, or if my value had always been tied to my success. Sunday arrived with unseasonable sunshine, as if the universe was mocking my mood. I drove to my parents' lakeside home in Bellevue, the house they'd bought when Dad's software patent finally paid off. It was a modernist structure of glass and cedar, perched on the water like a magazine feature rather than a family home. I parked my 10-year-old Honda between Madison's Tesla and Mom's Range Rover, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for a moment, gathering strength. Inside, the scene was achingly familiar. Dad at the grill on the deck, Mom arranging flowers in the kitchen, Madison holding court in the living room, gesturing with a glass of something expensive. Her husband, Tyler, nodded along to whatever she was saying, his attention divided between his wife and his phone. The smell of charcoal and grilling salmon filled the air, mingling with the scent of Mom's signature lavender arrangements. I stepped through the door, and the conversation dimmed like someone had turned down the volume. Madison's eyes met mine, a flash of something, triumph, in them before she smiled brightly. Emily, you made it, she said, as if surprised I'd kept my word. We were just talking about Reynolds' new acquisition. The team's been working insane hours, but Dad says it'll be worth it when the stock options mature. Right, Dad? Dad nodded from the deck, raising his tongs in greeting but not actually coming inside. Mom wiped her hands on her apron and approached for a hug that felt more like a formal handshake with arms. How are you holding up, honey? She asked, but continued before I could answer. The salmon's almost ready. Would you mind setting the table? The good plates, I think. And just like that, I was assigned a task that would keep me busy and out of the main conversation. I moved to the dining room, carefully setting out the hand-painted plates Mom only used for special occasions. Madison followed, leaning against the doorframe. Tyler's getting promoted to senior director, she said casually. We're looking at houses in Medina, you know, where Bill Gates lives. The market's insane, but Dad's connecting us with his investment. Guy! I arranged forks with mechanical precision. That's great, Mads. You'll bounce back, she continued, voice dripping with false encouragement. Maybe try something less specialized? Coding boot camps are turning out decent entry-level people these days. Entry-level. After 6 years leading projects, my hand tightened around a knife. Actually, I said, surprising myself, I've been thinking about something else entirely. She raised an eyebrow. Like what? Teaching? Retail? Oh God, not one of those multi-level marketing things. The dining room suddenly felt too small, too airless. Through the window, I could see the lake stretching out, vast and uncomplicated. How had I never noticed how trapped I felt in this house, in this family dynamic, in the narrow definition of success they'd all agreed upon? I'm moving to Portland, I said, the decision crystallizing as the words left my mouth. I have some ideas I want to explore, my own venture. Madison's laugh was instantaneous and dismissive. Your own venture? Be serious. It takes connections and capital to start something. You need a safety net. Maybe I don't, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Maybe I just need to believe I have something worth building. She shook her head like I was a naive child. Well, when reality sets in, let me know. I can probably get you an interview for something entry-level at Reynolds. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nothing fancy, but it's stable. Before I could respond, Mom called us to dinner. We gathered around the table, and Dad raised a glass in his customary dinner toast. To family, he said, and to success. Everyone clinked glasses. No one asked about my plans. No one offered encouragement. The conversation flowed around me like I was a rock in a stream, present but not affecting the current. Madison dominated as usual, talking about Reynolds Innovations' market position, Tyler's prospects, their vacation plans. Mom and Dad nodded along, occasionally asking questions that allowed her to elaborate further. I ate silently, feeling increasingly like a ghost at my own family table. Then Tyler, who rarely contributed much beyond agreeing with Madison, cleared his throat. Emily, what exactly are you thinking of doing in Portland? Any specific industry? The table went quiet. I had everyone's attention for the first time all evening. Madison shot her husband a look I couldn't quite interpret. Data visualization for small to mid-size nonprofits, I said, the idea becoming clearer as I spoke it aloud. Most of them are working with outdated systems that make it hard to tell their impact stories to donors. I think I could create something more accessible. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. That's actually a huge gap in the market. Reynolds tried to break into that space last year, but the profit margins were too thin for a company our size. Madison cut in. But perfect for someone with no overhead and no employees, right? Very boutique. The way she said boutique made it sound like hobby. Dad looked contemplative. It would be a tough space to monetize effectively. Maybe. Money isn't the only measure of value, I said quietly. The silence that followed made it clear how radical that statement was in this house, to this family. The idea that purpose might matter more than profit was apparently too revolutionary to even debate. Mom changed the subject to cousin Zach's wedding plans. And just like that, my future was dismissed as unworthy of further discussion. After dinner, as I helped Mom load the dishwasher, she sighed heavily. I wish you'd let Madison help you. She has connections. There's no shame in accepting a hand up. It's not about shame, Mom, I said, carefully placing a wine glass in the rack. It's about finding my own path. Your own path has led to unemployment, she replied, not unkindly but matter-of-factly. Sometimes the sensible choice is to follow the established route. I looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered when she'd stopped believing in possibilities. Had she ever had dreams beyond this beautiful house and her perfect hostess routine? Had she surrendered them willingly, or had they been worn away by years of practicality? I'm going to try anyway, I said. She patted my arm. You always were. Stubborn. Just don't wait too long to course correct. 2 weeks later, I packed my Honda with everything I could fit and drove south to Portland. I'd found a small one-bedroom apartment downtown. Nothing fancy but walking distance to a co-working space called The Hub, where I could rent a desk month to month. My savings would cover about 4 months of expenses if I was careful. It wasn't much of a runway, but it was enough to start. The first few weeks were a blur of setting up, reaching out to contacts, and refining my business model. I called my Venture Horizon Solutions, a name I hoped suggested both vision and practicality. I built a website, created sample visualizations, and began cold emailing nonprofits. For every 20 emails, I might get 1 response. For every 5 responses, maybe 1 exploratory call. The math was daunting, but I kept at it, refining my pitch each time. Madison called every Sunday, ostensibly to check in, but our conversations always circled back to the same theme. Any bites yet? She'd ask. A few promising leads, I'd answer, regardless of the truth. You know the offer still stands for an interview at Reynolds, she'd remind me. Victor is always looking for good people. I'd thank her politely and change the subject. The mere thought of working under my sister's watchful eye, being the charity case she could point to as evidence of her generosity, made my skin crawl. 6 weeks in, I got my first real client, a small environmental nonprofit that needed to visualize watershed data for grant applications. The project fee would cover barely 2 weeks of expenses, but it was something. I worked day and night on it, pouring everything I had into making it perfect. When I delivered the final product, the executive director was so impressed she referred me to 2 other organizations. Slowly, word began to spread. My calendar started filling with discovery calls. My portfolio grew. I wasn't profitable yet, not even close, but there was momentum. Each night, I'd fall into bed exhausted but with a sense of purpose I'd never felt at TechForward. This was mine. Every success, every setback, every decision, the weight of it was terrifying and exhilarating. 3 months after moving to Portland, I got the call that changed everything. A mid-sized international aid organization needed comprehensive data, visualization tools for donor reporting across multiple programs. It would be my biggest project yet, enough to stabilize my finances for months if I landed it. The only catch, the final pitch would be at their headquarters in Seattle. I spent 2 weeks preparing, refining my presentation until every slide, every word was exactly right. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, in the park, to the barista at my local coffee shop who started to recognize me. This wasn't just a project, it was validation, proof that my vision had merit. The day before my presentation, my phone rang with a call from an unfamiliar Seattle number. "Emily Chen?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Speaking. This is Olivia Patel from TechForward. We worked on the Vismark project together last year." I remembered her. Brilliant UX designer, always generous with feedback. "Of course, Olivia. How are you?" "I'm calling because..." She paused. "Look, this isn't exactly professional, but I thought you should know. Your sister was in our office. Yesterday, meeting with Marcus, I overheard them talking about Horizon Solutions." My stomach dropped. "What about it?" "They mentioned tomorrow's presentation to Global Impact Alliance. Marcus said he'd make some calls, suggests they hold off on any decisions. Something about a competing proposal from Reynolds." The room seemed to tilt. Madison had always been competitive, always needed to win, but this was different. This was sabotage. "Emily, are you there?" Olivia asked. "Yes," I managed. "Thank you for telling me." "For what it's worth, what you're building looks amazing. A lot of us were shocked when they let you go." After hanging up, I sat motionless, trying to process what I'd just learned. Madison wasn't just dismissing my efforts, she was actively working to undermine them. And she was using her connections, her position, to do it. The unfairness of it burned through me, hot and clarifying. But beneath the anger was something else. Determination. I called the Global Impact Alliance and asked to move my presentation up to that afternoon. They were surprised but accommodating. I threw my materials together, jumped in my car, and drove north, rehearsing all the way. I was exhausted and running on adrenaline by the time I reached their Seattle office, but something in me had hardened. I wasn't just pitching a project anymore. I was fighting for my company's life before it had really begun. The presentation room was intimidating. 15 people around a massive table, all with expressions that said, "Impress me." I took a deep breath and began. "You have other proposals to consider," I said, departing from my prepared opening. "From established companies with resources I can't match. What I offer instead is focus. Your mission becomes my mission. Your data tells stories no one else can tell with the same care. Because for me, this isn't one project among dozens. It's central to why I built Horizon Solutions." For the next hour, I talked about their specific challenges, demonstrating prototypes. I'd built using publicly available data from their annual reports. I showed how their impact story could be clearer, more compelling, more likely to engage donors. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then their executive director leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, that was extraordinarily thoughtful work. We have other presentations scheduled, including one tomorrow, but you've set a high bar." I drove back to Portland that night, physically drained, but mentally electric. Win or lose, I had done my absolute best. I had looked potential failure in the face and found my voice. Whatever happened next, that couldn't be taken from me. 3 days later, I got the email. I had won the contract. Against established competitors, against my sister's interference, against the odds. I sat in my small apartment, reading and rereading the message until my vision blurred with tears. Not of sadness this time, but of vindication. I didn't call Madison to confront her. What would be the point? Instead, I focused on delivering exceptional work. The Global Impact Alliance project led to others. 6 months after leaving Seattle, Horizon Solutions was not just surviving, but beginning to thrive. I hired my first employee, then my second. We moved from my desk at the hub to a small office with a view of the Willamette River. Then came the email I never expected, an invitation to the annual Reynolds Innovations Gala in Seattle. It was addressed to Emily Chen, CEO, Horizon Solutions, and came directly from Victor Reynolds' office. Apparently, Reynolds was launching a corporate social responsibility initiative, and someone had recommended my company's work. The invitation was to discuss potential collaboration. My first instinct was to decline. The thought of facing Madison in her territory, at an event where she'd expect to shine, made my chest tight. But then I thought about how far I'd come, about the projects we were doing that actually mattered. I RSVP'd yes. The gala was held at the Summit, one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants with panoramic views of the city and Elliott Bay. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple black dress, nothing flashy, but impeccably tailored. Professional, confident, understated. I arrived exactly on time, neither eagerly early nor fashionably late. The space was transformed by subtle lighting and elaborate floral arrangements. Seattle's tech elite mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, talking about valuations and market share as if they were discussing the weather. I scanned the room, spotted Madison near the center in a dramatic red dress, holding court as usual. She hadn't seen me yet. "Emily Chen?" A tall man with silver hair approached, hand extended. "Victor Reynolds. Thank you for coming." I shook his hand, surprised by the genuine warmth in his greeting. "Thank you for the invitation. Your work for Global Impact Alliance caught my attention. Remarkable visualization of complex data sets makes the abstract tangible." He gestured to a server for champagne. "I understand you built your company from scratch after leaving TechForward." "I did," I confirmed, accepting a glass. "It's been an interesting journey." "The best ones usually are." He smiled. "I started Reynolds in my garage after being passed over for promotion 3 times. Best rejection I ever received." Before I could respond, Madison appeared at Victor's elbow, her smile freezing when she saw me. "Emily, what a surprise." Her voice was pitched just a touch too high. "Victor, this is my sister." "Yes, we were just getting acquainted," Victor replied smoothly. "Your sister's company is doing fascinating work." Madison's expression flickered. "Oh? I wasn't aware Horizon was on your radar." "Very much so, in fact." Victor was interrupted by a chime indicating dinner was about to be served. "We'll continue this conversation at the table. Emily, you'll be at the main table with us." As we moved toward the dining area, Madison gripped my arm. "What exactly are you doing here?" she hissed. "I was invited," I replied simply, gently removing her hand. "By whom?" "By the CEO of Reynolds Innovations," I said, unable to resist. the small satisfaction of watching her composure slip. Your boss. The seating arrangement placed me directly across from Victor, with Madison 3 seats away, close enough to hear our conversation, but not participate in it. Throughout dinner, Victor asked detailed questions about my business model, my approach to client relationships, my vision for growth. I answered honestly, passionately, no longer concerned with how Madison might perceive my words. After the main course, Victor stood to make remarks, thanking everyone for attending, highlighting Reynolds' successful year. Standard corporate. Celebration fare. But then he shifted. Innovation isn't just about technology, he said. It's about perspective. Seeing problems others miss and addressing them in ways others haven't considered. He raised his glass. I'd like to recognize someone who exemplifies this spirit. Emily Chen, CEO of Horizon Solutions. The spotlight found me as conversation hushed. Across the table, Madison's face was a study in conflicting emotions. In just 8 months, Victor continued, Emily has built a company that's redefining how nonprofit organizations visualize and communicate their impact. She saw a need others overlooked and created elegant solutions to address it. The kind of innovative thinking Reynolds hopes to support through our new social impact initiative. He raised his glass higher. To Emily Chen, possibly the most promising CEO I've encountered in a decade, Reynolds Innovations is proud to announce a strategic partnership with Horizon Solutions, effective immediately. The room applauded. Madison's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. I nodded my thanks to Victor, feeling strangely calm despite the spotlight. This moment wasn't about proving something to my sister anymore. It wasn't even about professional validation, though that felt good too. It was about the realization that I had finally stopped measuring my worth through others' eyes, especially Madison's. Later, as the event wound down, Madison cornered me by the coat check. Quite the performance, she said, voice tight. I hope you know what you're doing. Victor has high expectations. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Fear. Not of me exactly, but of losing. The narrative she'd constructed. The one where she was always ahead, always superior, always the daughter who had it figured out. I'm not trying to compete with you, Mads, I said softly. I never was. That was your game, not mine. Her expression flickered with something like confusion. Then what are you trying to do? Build something meaningful, on my terms. I collected my coat from the attendant. That's all I've ever wanted. As I walked toward the exit, she called after me. Emily? I turned. She hesitated, then asked, How did you know that this was the right move, even when everyone said it wasn't? For a moment, I glimpsed the sister I'd known before competition and comparison had carved a canyon between us. Not the polished professional, or the smirking saboteur, but just Madison, uncertain, human. I didn't know, I admitted. I still don't. But I'd rather fail at something I believe in than succeed at something that leaves me empty. She didn't respond, but something in her expression shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. I didn't wait to find out. I stepped into the cool Seattle night, the city lights reflecting off the bay like scattered stars. 6 months later, the Reynolds partnership has expanded Horizon's reach beyond what I could have imagined. We've moved to larger offices, hired a team of 12, and launched projects across 3 continents. Madison and I speak occasionally, professional, cordial conversations that stay within safe boundaries. She hasn't apologized for trying to sabotage my presentation, and I haven't asked her to. Some bridges take longer to rebuild than others. Last week, I received an unexpected package at the office. Inside was a framed photograph I'd never seen. Before, Madison and me as children, building a sandcastle on Alki Beach. On the back, she'd written simply, "We used to build things together. Maybe someday again." I placed it on my desk, next to my computer where I can see it every day. Not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a question mark about what might still be possible. The castle in the photo was lopsided, misshapen, clearly, doomed to collapse with the next wave. But our faces showed only pride and possibility, untroubled by thoughts of impermanence. Some days I think that's the most valuable thing I've recovered since that rainy Tuesday when everything fell apart. The ability to build without guarantees, to value the process over perfection, to measure success by my own standards rather than someone else's applause. And that, more than any contract or partnership or recognition, feels like the real victory. Sometimes the path to finding your voice begins with losing everything you thought defined you. If you're standing at that crossroads now, take a deep breath and remember, the story doesn't end where they think it will. It ends where you decide to write the next chapter. The morning after the family dinner, I woke with a strange sense of clarity. My apartment seemed different somehow, not physically changed, but viewed through new eyes. The framed diploma on the wall that had once felt like a badge of accomplishment now seemed like just another piece of paper. The Seattle skyline outside, my window, once a symbol of having made it, now felt like a prison of expectations. I made coffee and opened my laptop, staring at the blank document titled Resignation Letter. I'd drafted and deleted it at least 6 times already. This time, I didn't need it. The decision to leave had been made for me. Instead, I created a new document, Portland Relocation Plan. My phone buzzed with texts. Jessica, my best friend, since college, had seen Madison's video. What a nightmare, coming over with emergency wine and job listings. I smiled despite everything. Jessica had been the voice of reason through every crisis of my adult life. But this time, I didn't want reasonable advice about updating my resume or networking strategies. I wanted to burn the whole playbook and start fresh. When she arrived an hour later, bottle in hand and concern etched on her face, I was already surrounded by boxes. What are you doing?" she asked, setting down the wine on the only clear spot on my coffee table. "Packing," I replied simply, continuing to sort books into keep and donate piles. She opened the wine without waiting for an answer and poured 2 generous glasses. "Portland. I'm moving next week." Jessica paused mid-pour. "Portland? Since when do you want to live in Portland?" I accepted the glass she handed me. "Since I realized Seattle has become a city of ghosts for me. TechForward, my family. That version of Emily Chen who thought following all the rules would guarantee security." "This seems impulsive," she said carefully, settling onto the couch. "Maybe take some time to process before making big decisions. The job market here is tough right now, but not impossible." I shook my head. "I'm not looking for another job. At least not working for someone else." "Okay." She drew out the word, studying me over the rim of her glass. "What exactly are you planning? Remember that visualization project I built for the local food bank last year? The one TechForward wouldn't let me expand because it wasn't commercially viable." Jessica nodded. She'd seen the prototype, an elegant system that transformed dry statistics about hunger into compelling interactive stories that helped the food bank triple their donations. "I'm going to build that, for every nonprofit that needs to tell their story better, for organizations doing good work that gets buried under bad presentations and impenetrable spreadsheets." "You're starting a company," she stated, not a question, but a realization. "Yes." The word felt definitive, like stepping through a doorway I couldn't return through. Jessica was silent for a moment, swirling her wine thoughtfully. I braced for the rational counterarguments, the statistics about startup failures, the reminder of my dwindling savings, the suggestion that grief and anger weren't the best foundation for major life decisions. Instead, she raised her glass. "Two Horizon Solutions. That's what you're calling it, right? You've been talking about that name since our coding bootcamp days. The tightness in my chest loosened. You think I'm not crazy? Oh, you're definitely crazy, she laughed. But the good kind. The necessary kind. Her expression softened. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? You try. It doesn't work out. You come back and get another corporate job. The ceiling doesn't cave in. Madison would never let me hear the end of it, I murmured. Jessica's eyes sharpened. Is that what this is about? Proving something to your sister? No, I said quickly, then hesitated. Maybe partly, at first, but it's more than that. I'm tired of measuring my worth by Madison's yardstick, by anyone's yardstick but my own. Then make sure that's what drives you forward, she said, reaching for the bottle to refill our glasses. Not spite, not fear, not even the need to prove something. Build because you have something worth building. We spent the rest of the evening sorting through my belongings, Jessica helping me decide what was worth taking to my new life and what needed to be left behind. By midnight, my apartment was transformed, half-packed boxes everywhere, walls bare of art, shelves emptied of books. It looked like a life being dismantled, which was exactly what was happening. As Jessica was leaving, she hugged me tightly. I'm going to miss you, she whispered. But I'm also ridiculously proud of you. For what? I haven't done anything yet. She pulled back, hands on my shoulders. For choosing courage over comfort. Not many people do. After she left, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the city lights, mentally mapping the route my life had taken through Seattle's grid-like streets. College, first apartment, first job, promotions, setbacks, the condo I'd purchased last year thinking it would be home for the foreseeable future. All the careful steps of a life planned for stability above all else. I'd done everything right, graduated. With honors, built a solid resume, saved diligently, networked strategically. I'd followed the blueprint for success that had been held up as gospel since childhood. And yet here I was, unemployed and untethered at 32. The safety I'd sacrificed for had proven illusory. Dawn was breaking when I finally opened my laptop again. This time I created a business plan. Nothing fancy, just the bones of what Horizon Solutions could be. By noon, I had registered the domain name and started sketching a logo. By evening, I'd found a month-to-month rental in Portland's Pearl District and put down a deposit. The speed of it all should have been terrifying, but instead, each decision felt like removing a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The hardest part was telling my parents. I waited until 3 days before my planned departure, meeting them for lunch at a quiet cafe near their Bellevue home. I chose a public place deliberately, hoping it would keep emotions in check, theirs and mine. Mom arrived first, elegant as always in a cashmere sweater and pearls. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and a concerned once-over, as if checking for visible signs of my professional downfall. You look tired, honey, she said, settling into her chair. Have you been sleeping? I've been busy, I replied, deliberately vague. Dad arrived minutes later, checking his watch as he sat down. Sorry I'm late. The traffic from Redmond was brutal. Mom ordered a salad, Dad his usual club sandwich. I toyed with my soup, rehearsing the speech I'd prepared. But when the moment came, I abandoned the carefully crafted explanation and went with simple truth. I'm moving to Portland on Friday, I said between bites. I've found an apartment and I'm starting my own business. Mom's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Dad's expression didn't change, but his chewing slowed. The ambient noise of the cafe, clattering dishes, quiet conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, suddenly seemed louder in contrast to our table's silence. Portland, Mom repeated flatly. This Friday. I nodded, taking a deliberate spoonful of soup. What kind of business? Dad asked, ever practical. Data visualization for nonprofits. helping them tell their impact stories more effectively to increase donations and engagement. He frowned slightly. That's a pretty niche market. Have you done any validation? Market research? Some, I admitted. Enough to know there's a need. The rest I'll figure out as I go. Mom set down her fork. Emily, this seems hasty. Why not take some time? Look for positions here. Madison mentioned Reynolds might have some openings. There it was. The comparison. The suggestion that Madison's path was the right one. The assumed superiority of working for an established company over creating something new. All delivered with maternal concern, which made it harder to resist. I don't want to work for Reynolds, I said firmly, or any company right now. I want to build something that matters. TechForward mattered, Dad countered. They're an industry leader. TechForward cared about shareholder value, period. The edge in my voice surprised even me. Everything else was window dressing. Dad's expression hardened slightly. That window dressing paid for your condo and your graduate degree. I know, I said, softening my tone. And I'm grateful for the opportunities I had there. But this is something I need to do. Mom reached across the table for my hand. Honey, we just worry. Starting over in a new city, a new business. The statistics aren't encouraging. I'm not a statistic, Mom. I'm your daughter, and I'm asking for your support, not your permission. Their exchange of glances spoke volumes. Concern, confusion, a silent marital communication honed over decades. Finally, Dad sighed. How long can you float financially? 4 months, comfortably. 6 if I'm frugal. He nodded, processing. And if it doesn't work out? Then I'll have learned something valuable and I'll try something else. I met his gaze directly. Failure isn't fatal, Dad. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. No, it's not, though it can be expensive. Mom squeezed my hand. We just want you to be happy and secure. I know, I said, squeezing back. But I'm learning that security without purpose feels empty to me. We finished lunch in a fragile truce. They didn't try to talk me out of it further, but neither did they offer enthusiastic support. They promised to visit once I was settled. Dad insisted on paying for lunch. Mom hugged me a beat longer than usual when we parted. Small gestures that felt like the maximum endorsement they could muster for a plan they didn't fully understand or approve. As I walked to my car, I checked my phone out of habit. A text from Madison. Mom says you're moving to Portland? Followed by 3 question marks and a shocked emoji. I didn't respond. Whatever I said would become material for her running commentary on my life choices. Instead, I drove home and continued packing, methodically wrapping framed photos in newspaper, sorting kitchen utensils into essentials and extras, filling a box with books I'd been meaning to read for years. Friday morning dawned clear and cool. I'd hired movers for the furniture I was keeping, but most of my belongings fit into my Honda. Jessica came to say goodbye, bringing coffee and croissants from our favorite bakery. We sat on my bare living room floor, mugs balanced on our knees. Text me when you get there, she said. And I expect weekly updates on Horizon's progress. Daily cat pictures too? I teased. Obviously, that's non-negotiable. The movers arrived at 10, efficient and impersonal as they wrapped my couch, dining table, and bed frame. By noon, the apartment was empty except for the boxes destined for my car. Jessica helped me load them, teasing me about my methodical approach to fitting everything in like a game of Tetris. As I closed the trunk, a sleek black Tesla pulled up behind my Honda. Madison stepped out, immaculate in tailored pants and a silk blouse despite the casual Friday. Her expression was unreadable behind oversized sunglasses. Thought I'd catch you before you left, she said, approaching cautiously like I might bolt. Jessica gave me a meaningful look. I'll give you 2 a minute, she said, walking toward. Her car parked across the street. Madison watched her go, then turned back to me. Mom said you're really doing this. Yep, I checked my watch. Actually, I need to get on the road soon if I want to beat traffic. She took off her sunglasses, and I was surprised to see something almost like hurt in her eyes. You weren't going to tell me yourself? I had to hear it from Mom? The question caught me off guard. Did she really expect personal updates after filming my lowest professional moment for family entertainment? I didn't think you'd care, I said honestly. Of course I care, she replied, sounding genuinely offended. You're my sister. Being family hasn't exactly meant support lately, I pointed out, trying to keep my tone neutral. Or ever, really. She flinched slightly, then recovered. That's not fair. I've always encouraged you. I almost laughed. Encouraged me to what? Follow your path? Accept your definition of success? Take the safe route you approved of? I've been looking out for you, she insisted. I know the industry. I know how brutal startups can be. 90% fail in the first year. Then I'll be in the 10%, I said simply. She studied me for a moment, then sighed. This is really happening, isn't it? You're just leaving, starting over. Yes, because of what happened at TechForward. The question held layers. Was she acknowledging her role in humiliating me? Was she suggesting I was running away? Was she genuinely trying to understand? Partly, I admitted. But it's more than that. I need to build something that matters to me. Something that's mine. She nodded slowly, processing. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Victor Reynolds, she said, holding it out. His direct line is on the back, if you need anything. I stared at the card, uncertain. Was this a peace offering or another attempt to exert influence? To claim credit if I succeeded by using her connection? I don't need your boss's help, Madison. Just take it, she said, pushing it toward me. File it away. Throw it out when I leave. Whatever. But know it's there. I accepted the card, slipping it into my jacket pocket. Thank you. An awkward silence stretched between us. There was so much unsaid. Years of competition and comparison, the recent betrayal, the fundamental difference in how we viewed success and purpose. Too much for a parking lot goodbye. Drive safely, she finally said, putting her sunglasses back on. The I-5 gets weird around Olympia. I will. She hesitated, then stepped forward and gave me a brief, stiff hug. Good luck, Em. I mean it. Before I could respond, she was walking back to her Tesla, phone already in hand, returning to her carefully constructed life of achievement and status. I watched until she drove away, trying to process the unexpected interaction. Had there been genuine concern beneath her skepticism? Was the card a sincere offer of help, or a way to maintain control? With Madison, it was always hard to tell where. Sisterly feeling ended and personal agenda began. Jessica returned, eyebrows raised in silent question. She wished me luck, I said, still slightly bewildered. Miracles never cease, Jessica replied dryly. Ready to hit the road? I took one last look at the apartment building that had been home for the past 3 years. Ready? The drive to Portland took just under 3 hours, the familiar landscape of the Pacific Northwest sliding past my windows, evergreen forests, glimpses of water, mountains in the distance. With each mile, I felt the weight of expectations lifting, replaced by a mixture of terror and exhilaration. My new apartment was smaller than my Seattle condo, in an older building with creaky floors and radiator heat, but it had character. Exposed. Brick walls, tall windows that flooded the space with natural light, a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. The movers had already delivered my furniture, pieces that looked both familiar and strange in this new context. That first night, surrounded by boxes and eating takeout Thai food on my couch, I had a moment of panic. What was I doing? Had I just torpedoed my career on an impulse? Was Madison right about the failure rates? Would I end up crawling back to Seattle in 6 months, broke and humiliated? I took a deep breath and pulled out my laptop. Instead of spiraling, I opened my business plan and kept working. Logo concepts, website structure, service packages, potential client research. I worked until exhaustion overtook anxiety, falling asleep on the couch with my computer still open beside me. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through, uncurtained windows and the unfamiliar sounds of my new neighborhood. A dog barking, a streetcar bell, voices from the cafe below. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The firing, Madison's video, the family dinner, the move. The fear returned, but something else came with it. Possibility. I spent that first week in Portland establishing routines and systems. I found a co-working space called The Hub where I could rent a desk month to month. I set up a business bank account and registered Horizon Solutions as an LLC. I created a modest website showcasing the work I'd done at TechForward, carefully anonymized to avoid legal issues. I developed a prospecting list of Portland-based nonprofits and began crafting personalized outreach emails. The co-working space became my second home. Unlike the sterile, competitive atmosphere of TechForward, the Hub was collaborative and eclectic. My desk neighbors included a documentary filmmaker, a sustainable fashion designer, and a food writer, all fellow entrepreneurs at different stages of their journeys. They welcomed me without judgment, offering coffee, connections, and commiseration about the startup hustle. Eli, the filmmaker, became an unexpected ally. He'd been freelancing for 5 years and had weathered every crisis an independent creative could face. First month, I ate nothing but ramen and apples, he told me over happy hour beers. 6th month, I landed National Geographic. 10th month, back to ramen when they paid late. It's a roller coaster. How do you handle the uncertainty? I asked. He shrugged. You get used to it. Or you don't, and you go back to a steady paycheck. No shame either way. But the freedom to choose your projects? To build something aligned with your values? For me, it's worth the nausea. Those conversations sustained me through the silent phone days, the unanswered emails, the dwindling bank account that kept me awake at night. Every morning, I'd arrive at the Hub by 8, thermos of home-brewed coffee in hand to save money and work until evening. Researching prospects, refining pitches, developing sample visualizations, reaching out to every contact I had ever made. The first responses were discouraging. We don't have budget for this. We handle our data in-house. Interesting, but not a priority right now. I'd return to my apartment each night and calculate how many days of runway I had left, the number shrinking with each passing week. Then, finally, a breakthrough. A small environmental nonprofit needed help visualizing watershed data for an important grant application. The budget was tiny, barely enough to cover 2 weeks of expenses, but it was a start. I threw myself into the project, working weekends, refining every detail, determined to make this first official Horizon Solutions project exceptional. When I delivered the final product, the executive director was genuinely impressed. This tells our story in ways we've never been able to before, she said during our wrap-up call. The board is thrilled. Would you mind if I shared your information with some colleagues in the environmental sector? That referral led to 2 more small projects, which led to others. Slowly, Horizon began to build momentum. I established packages at different price points to accommodate varying nonprofit budgets. I created case studies showcasing the impact of better data visualization on donation rates and engagement. I started a simple newsletter sharing tips and examples. 3 months after moving to Portland, I had enough steady work to breathe a little easier. I wasn't profitable yet, far from it, but the trajectory was encouraging. More importantly, I was building something that aligned with my values. Each project directly contributed to causes I cared about: environmental protection, food security, educational access. The gratitude from small organizations doing vital work with limited resources filled a part of me that had been empty at TechForward, despite the prestigious projects and better pay. I'd settled into a routine, found favorite spots in my new city, even made a few friends beyond my co-working space connections. I'd spoken to my parents a handful of times, brief, somewhat awkward conversations where they carefully avoided asking direct questions about Horizon's finances. Madison and I hadn't communicated at all since the parking lot goodbye, though I occasionally saw her posts on social media, photos from Reynolds corporate events, announcements about new clients, a weekend trip to wine country. Then came the email that changed everything. Global Impact Alliance, an international aid organization with headquarters in Seattle, was seeking proposals for a comprehensive data visualization solution across their programs. It was exactly the type of project Horizon was designed for, but at a scale I hadn't yet attempted. The budget was substantial, enough to stabilize my finances for months if I landed it. I spent days researching the organization, studying their current reporting methods, identifying gaps and opportunities. I prepared a detailed proposal that highlighted Horizon's personalized approach and demonstrated how better visualization could transform their donor communications. I submitted it with a mixture of hope and trepidation, knowing this would be a competitive process against established firms. A week later, I received a response. I was on the short list. They wanted an in-person presentation at their Seattle headquarters. The final step before a decision. This was it, the opportunity I'd been working toward. A chance to establish Horizon as a serious contender in the nonprofit data space. A project that could launch the company to a new level of stability and impact. But it also meant returning to Seattle. Facing the city I'd left behind. Possibly encountering former colleagues. Standing on my own in the very environment where I'd been so publicly dismissed. I booked a hotel room for the night before the presentation. Packed my most professional outfit. Prepared slides, talking points, demonstrations, rehearsed until I could present with confidence without stumbling over technical terms or losing my train of thought. This wasn't just a pitch, it was a statement. Proof that leaving had been the right choice, that Horizon Solutions was viable, that Emily Chen had found her path. The night before my return to Seattle, I received a text from an unknown number. Heard you're presenting to Global Impact tomorrow. Dinner tonight? Need to talk. No signature, but I knew immediately it was Madison. My sister had always been plugged into the Seattle tech scene gossip network. Of course she'd know about my presentation. The question was, why did she want to meet? I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. After everything, the video, the family dinner, 3 months of silence, what could she possibly have to say that I needed to hear? But curiosity won out. Where and when? I texted back. Her response came immediately. Luciana's, 8 p.m. Luciana's was a small Italian place in Capitol Hill, quiet enough for conversation, casual enough to avoid feeling formal. Neutral territory. I arrived deliberately 5 minutes late, not wanting to appear eager or accommodating. Madison was already seated at a corner table, a glass of red wine in front of her. She'd come straight from work, still in her Reynolds. Corporate attire, tailored blazer, silk shell, the understated diamond studs that had been a gift from our parents when she made director. Her hair was different, shorter with subtle highlights, but her posture was the same, poised, confident, slightly intimidating. She stood as I approached, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Emily, you look Portland. I glanced down at my outfit. Dark jeans, a simple blouse, ankle boots. More relaxed than the corporate wear I'd packed for tomorrow's presentation. Thanks, I think. We sat in awkward silence as the server poured water and recited specials. I ordered a glass of wine and focused on the menu, though I wasn't particularly hungry. The tension between us was palpable, years of competition and recent wounds creating an invisible barrier across the small table. "How's Horizon?" she finally asked after we'd ordered. "Growing," I replied, deliberately vague. "How's Reynolds?" "Busy. We just landed Westfield Financial." "A big client," she didn't need to add. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I recognized the familiar pattern. Establishing. Her success before engaging with mine. I took a sip of wine, giving myself a moment to settle the rising defensiveness Madison always triggered in me. "Actually, I didn't come here to compare client lists," I said. "You texted me. What did you need to talk about?" Madison leaned forward, slightly, lowering her voice though there was no one near enough to overhear. "Your presentation tomorrow, to Global Impact Alliance." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What about it?" "You're up against Reynolds," she said, watching my reaction carefully. "Among others. Did you know that?" I hadn't. My research had indicated they were considering several proposals, but I hadn't identified the competitors. The revelation that I'd be pitching against my sister's company, one of the largest in the Pacific Northwest, made the already daunting task feel suddenly insurmountable. "I see," I managed, keeping my voice steady. "Thanks for the heads up." Madison's eyebrows drew together. "That's it? Thanks for the heads up? Emily, do you understand what you're walking into? Reynolds has been cultivating global impact for months. Victor himself is overseeing the pitch. They've allocated 6 figures to the initial development phase alone. And you're telling me this because—" I left the question hanging between us. She looked genuinely confused. "Because you should know what you're up against. Because maybe you should consider—" She trailed off. "Consider what?" I pressed. "Withdrawing? Admitting defeat before I even present? Accepting that I can't possibly compete with Mighty Reynolds?" "That's not what I meant," she said, though the flicker in her eyes suggested it wasn't far off. "I just thought—" "You thought you'd warn me that I'm outmatched, that I should manage my expectations, that I should know my place." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Madison set down her wine glass with deliberate care. "Is that really what you think of me? That I came here to gloat or intimidate you?" "I don't know why you came here," I admitted. 3 months of silence, and suddenly you're concerned about my business prospects? It doesn't track, Madison. She was quiet for a moment, tracing a finger around the base of her glass. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. "I heard Marcus is consulting with Reynolds on the Global Impact Project." The name hung in the air between us. Marcus Wade, my former boss, the one who had fired me with corporate platitudes and a security escort. The one whose team would now have access to my proposal, my ideas, my approach. "Of course he is," I murmured, the pieces falling into place. "And he knows my work, my methods, my strengths and weaknesses." Madison nodded. "I overheard him and Victor discussing the competitive bids yesterday. Your name came up." A chill ran through me. "What did they say?" "Marcus mentioned your visualization framework, the one you developed at TechForward. Said it was innovative but ultimately impractical for large-scale implementation." She hesitated. "He also said your presentation skills were inconsistent, that you sometimes get flustered under pressure." Each word felt like a small cut, not because it was necessarily true, but because it came from someone who had once been a mentor, who had seen me at my most vulnerable, who now had the power to undermine my credibility. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked again, struggling to understand her motives. Madison looked genuinely perplexed. "Because you're my sister. Because it's not a fair fight if you don't know what you're walking into. Since when have you cared about fighting fair? You filmed me being escorted out of TechForward and shared it with the family for laughs." Her cheeks flushed slightly. That was... I shouldn't have done that. But you did, I said quietly. And now you expect me to believe you're warning me out of sisterly concern? Believe what you want, she replied, an edge returning to her voice. I just thought you should know that Marcus is actively working to tank your proposal, that he's feeding them criticisms of your approach before you even present. Our food arrived. Plates of pasta neither of us immediately touched. I tried to process what Madison was telling me. If she was being truthful, Marcus was essentially poisoning the well before I could make my case. But there was still something that didn't add up. Aren't you also trying to win this contract? I asked. Why help me when we're competing? Madison took a deliberate bite of her fettuccine, chewing slowly as if buying time. Reynolds will be fine with or without global impact. We have dozens of enterprise clients. This is just another project for us. She met my eyes. For you, it's make or break, isn't it? The accuracy of her assessment stung. I pushed my pasta around the plate, appetite gone. I still don't understand. Since when? Do you care if Horizon makes it or breaks? Despite what you think, Emily, I don't actually want you to fail, she said, sounding almost hurt. I've never wanted that. Really? Because it's felt that way my entire life. Madison set down her fork, the metal clinking against fine china. I've been hard on you, competitive, sometimes cruel. The admission seemed to cost her something. But I've also respected your talent, your intelligence, your integrity. The last word hung between us, heavy with implication. I studied my sister's face, trying to see past the polished exterior to whatever truth lay beneath. There was something in her expression I wasn't used to seeing. Uncertainty, perhaps. Vulnerability. What's really going on, Madison? I asked softly. This isn't just about warning me about Marcus. She took a long sip of wine, then set the glass down with precision. There are aspects of the Reynolds culture I'm starting to question, she said carefully. Approaches I'm not entirely comfortable with. Such as how we handle competition, how resources get allocated, the disconnect between our public statements about social impact and our internal priorities. She glanced around as if concerned about being overheard. The Global Impact Alliance proposal. It's not what it appears to be. My confusion must have shown on my face because she continued, voice lower still. Reynolds doesn't care about helping nonprofits visualize their data. They care about harvesting that data, mining it for patterns and insights they can monetize elsewhere. The visualization tools are just the Trojan horse. I stared at her, processing. Are you saying... I'm saying the contract includes language that gives Reynolds ownership of all insights derived from Global Impact's datasets. It's buried in the fine print, couched in technical jargon most nonprofit executives wouldn't scrutinize. But essentially, they'll be able to repackage and sell analysis based on Global Impact's work to commercial clients without additional compensation or consent. That's... I trailed off, searching for the right word. Exploitative, Madison finished for me. Especially given the sensitive nature of some of this data, refugee demographics, aid distribution patterns, health outcomes in vulnerable communities. I sat back, mind racing. Why tell me this? Why not take it to Victor or the board? A bitter smile twisted her lips. Because I tried. Victor assured me it was standard practice and mutually beneficial. The board sees the potential profit margin and doesn't ask questions about ethics. So you're warning me because Global Impact Alliance does important work, she said simply. Because they deserve better than to have their data weaponized for corporate gain. Because maybe you're the alternative they need, even if they don't know it yet. I studied her, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motive, but found only what appeared to be genuine concern. It was a side of Madison I couldn't remember seeing before, or perhaps had forgotten existed beneath years of competition and judgment. What exactly are you suggesting I do with this information? I asked cautiously. I'm not suggesting anything specific, she replied. Just be aware. And maybe make sure your proposal explicitly addresses data ownership and usage rights. Create a clear contrast without directly casting aspersions on competitors. I nodded slowly, mind already working through how I might adjust my presentation. Then a thought occurred to me. Won't this put you in a difficult position at Reynolds, if they find out you warned me? Madison's smile was tight. Probably. But I'm discovering there are some lines I'm not willing to cross, even for professional advancement. Perhaps especially for professional advancement. The admission hung between us, profound in its simplicity. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the tension that had defined our relationship for so long shifting into something more complex, less adversarial. Madison, I finally said, if you're so uncomfortable with Reynolds' approach, why stay? She set down her fork, expression unreadable. That's complicated. I've invested 8 years building my position there. My entire professional identity is tied to Reynolds. I understand that better than most, I said quietly, thinking of my own abrupt separation from TechForward. But is it worth it if you're compromising your values? A flash of something like anger crossed her face. That's easy for you to say now, isn't it? You've already burned the bridge, made the dramatic exit, started over with nothing to lose. I had plenty to lose, I countered. Financial security, professional reputation, family approval. I met her gaze directly, but I'm finding that what I've gained might be worth more. And what's that? There was no mockery in her question, just genuine curiosity. Alignment, I said after a moment's reflection. Between what I believe and what I build. Between who I am and what I do. Madison looked away, her expression softening. I'm not there yet, she admitted. Not ready to walk away from everything I've worked for. But I'm questioning things I never used to question. That's a start, I offered. We finished our meal in a strange new territory. Not quite friendship, not quite reconciliation, but something less hostile than what had existed between us for as long as I could remember. When the check came, Madison insisted on paying, and for once, I didn't fight her on it. Some battles weren't worth the energy anymore. Outside the restaurant, the Seattle night was crisp and clear, the skyline gleaming against the dark water of the Sound. Madison hesitated, as if unsure how to conclude our unexpected detente. Good luck tomorrow, she finally said. I mean, that. Thank you, I replied, genuinely grateful not just for her well wishes, but for the warning, the insight, the glimpse of the sister I'd almost forgotten existed, for everything. She nodded, then surprised me by leaning in for a brief, awkward hug. Just be your best self tomorrow. The Emily I remember from college, who could talk for hours about making data beautiful and meaningful. Before TechForward. Before, she gestured vaguely between us, encompassing the years of rivalry. I'll try, I promised. As I watched her walk to her car, I felt oddly unsettled. The Madison who had warned me about Marcus and Reynolds' ethics was so different from the sister who had recorded my professional humiliation. Which version was real? Had she genuinely evolved, or was this elaborate theater for reasons I couldn't yet discern? Back in my hotel room, I spread my presentation materials across the bed and began revising with Madison's revelations in mind. I created new slides specifically addressing data ownership, usage rights, and ethical considerations. I adjusted my language to subtly highlight the contrast between Horizon's community-centered approach and the extractive model Madison had described, without naming Reynolds directly. I worked until well past midnight, refining my pitch until it felt not just competent but compelling. A clear vision of partnership rather than exploitation. If I couldn't match Reynolds's resources or experience, I could at least offer transparency and alignment with Global Impact's mission. Morning came too quickly. I dressed carefully in the outfit I'd brought for the presentation, a simple charcoal suit that projected professionalism without the corporate armor Madison typically wore. I ate breakfast at a cafe near the Global Impact headquarters, reviewing my notes one final time, trying to anticipate questions and objections. The Global Impact Alliance offices occupied the 15th floor of a downtown tower, all glass and steel and grand views of Elliott Bay. The reception area was adorned with oversized photographs from their projects around the world: water access, initiatives in West Africa, education programs in Southeast Asia, disaster relief in the Caribbean, real people whose lives were impacted by the organization's work. A reminder of what was actually at stake beyond a business contract. I was shown to a conference room where 3 people waited: Diane Okafor, the executive director; James Chen, no relation, the technology director; and Sasha Petrov, the development officer. They greeted me warmly, offered water, made small talk about the weather while I set up my laptop and connected to the projector. "We've reviewed your written proposal, Ms. Chen," Diane began once we were settled. "Very impressive work for a company your size, but we do have questions about your capacity to handle a project of this scale, given Horizon's current resources." A direct challenge right out of the gate. I took a breath, centered myself. "That's a fair question," I acknowledged. Horizon Solutions is intentionally small and agile, which allows us to be responsive and focused. For the Global Impact Project, I've arranged partnerships with trusted developers who would work under my direct supervision. These are professionals I've collaborated with previously at TechForward, who share Horizon's commitment to ethical data practices. James nodded, making notes. "And your timeline?" "Reynolds has proposed a remarkably aggressive schedule." The mention of my competitor sent a small jolt through me, but I kept my expression neutral. "My timeline is realistic rather than aggressive. I believe in promising what can actually be delivered with excellence, not what sounds impressive in a proposal." Sasha leaned forward. "Can you elaborate on that distinction?" This was my opening to address what Madison had shared without directly attacking Reynolds. I chose my words carefully. "In my experience, truly effective data visualization tools require deep collaboration with the organizations using them, understanding not just your technical requirements, but your organizational values, your specific audiences, and how the data will be used in real-world contexts. That kind of collaborative development can't be rushed without sacrificing quality and alignment." Diane's expression was thoughtful. "And how do you approach data security and ownership, given the sensitive nature of much of our information?" "That's actually a critical point I'd like to address specifically in my presentation," I said, advancing to a slide I'd added last night. "Horizon's approach is founded on the principle that your data remains your data. Full stop. Any insights derived from that data belong to Global Impact Alliance. My role is to help you tell your story more effectively, not to repurpose your information for other contexts or clients." A subtle shift occurred in the room. James and Sasha exchanged glances. Diane's posture straightened slightly. I had touched on something significant. "That's refreshingly straightforward," Diane said. "We've seen some concerning language in other proposals regarding derivative works and aggregated insights." I nodded, keeping my expression professional while inwardly thanking Madison for her warning. Those terms often mask data harvesting, practices that benefit the service provider more than the client. I believe that's fundamentally misaligned with the work of organizations like Global Impact. With that foundation established, I moved through my presentation, demonstrating Horizon's approach, showcasing examples from previous nonprofit clients, and outlining my vision for Global Impact's data visualization ecosystem. The questions grew increasingly engaged, more collaborative than challenging. James asked about technical specifications, Sasha about donor engagement metrics, Diane about implementation processes. as I concluded, the atmosphere in the room felt markedly different than when I'd begun, warmer, more connected, charged with possibility rather than skepticism. "This is impressive work, Emily," Diane said, using my first name for the first time. "You've clearly given thought not just to the technical aspects, but to how these tools would integrate with our broader mission." "That's precisely my goal," I replied. "Technical excellence in service of meaningful impact." James closed his notebook. "I appreciate your honesty about Horizon's scale. Most small companies try to pretend they're bigger than they are. I'd rather be transparent about our limitations and strengths," I said. "My commitment is to direct involvement throughout the project. You'd be working with me personally, not getting handed off to a project manager once the contract is signed." Diane smiled. "That's become clear, and it's a compelling differentiator." She gathered her papers. "We have one more presentation to evaluate tomorrow, and then we'll be making our decision by the end of the week. Thank you for your time and thoughtfulness." We shook hands all around, exchanged pleasantries about Seattle's unusually cooperative weather, and then I was escorted back to the reception area. The entire presentation had lasted just over an hour, but it felt like a turning point, not just for Horizon's prospects, but for my own confidence in the path I'd chosen. As I waited for the elevator, the doors opened to reveal a familiar face. Marcus Wade. My former boss froze momentarily when he saw me, then recovered with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily," he said, stepping out while I stepped in. "I heard you were in the building." "Marcus," I acknowledged with a nod, struggling to maintain composure. This was the man who had fired me after 6 years, who had apparently been undermining me to Reynolds, who represented everything I'd left behind. "Best of luck with your venture," he said, the slight pause making it clear what he thought of Horizon's chances. The elevator doors began to close. Just before they shut completely, I found my voice. "It's not about luck, Marcus. It's about integrity." I caught just a glimpse of his startled expression before the doors sealed, leaving me alone in the descending elevator, heart pounding but spirits soaring. 6 months ago, I would have been intimidated into silence by his presence. Today, I had stood my ground. Outside, the Seattle afternoon was brightening, patches of blue appearing between clouds. I checked my phone to find a text from Madison. "How did it go?" I hesitated, still not entirely sure where we stood or how much I should share. Finally, I typed, "Better than expected. Thank you for the insight." Her response came quickly. "Anytime. Heading back to Portland?" "Yes. Afternoon train." There was a longer pause, then, "Coffee before you go? Commons Cafe, 2 p.m.? I stared at the message, torn between lingering suspicion and the pull of what felt like a genuine olive branch. After our dinner conversation and the way her warning had improved my presentation, perhaps I owed her the benefit of the doubt. "See you there," I replied. The Commons was a quiet, upscale cafe near the train station, popular with professionals but not crowded on a weekday afternoon. Madison was already there when I arrived, 2 cups on the table in front of her. "Oat milk latte, extra shot," she said, pushing one toward me. "You still take it that way?" "I do," I confirmed, surprised she remembered. "Thanks." She looked different somehow, still polished in her work attire, but less rigid, less performative. "How was the presentation, really?" I sipped my coffee, considering how much to share. "I think it went well. They seemed especially interested in the data ownership and ethics portions." A smile flickered across her face. "I thought they might be." "Your advice was helpful," I acknowledged, "though I'm still trying to understand why you gave it." Madison traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "Maybe I'm tired of the zero-sum mentality," she said quietly. "The idea that for me to win, you have to lose, or vice versa." "That's a recent development," I observed, not unkindly. Yes, she admitted. Recent and uncomfortable. Like realizing you've been playing a game so long you've forgotten it's not the only option. I studied. Her, this sister I'd competed with and resented and envied in equal measure for as long as I could remember. What changed? She met my gaze directly. Seeing you actually do it. Walk away. Start over. Build something that matters to you, regardless of status or security. She shook her head slightly. I told myself you were being impulsive, unrealistic, that you'd fail and come crawling back. Her voice softened. But you didn't. And watching you stand on your own terms, it made me question my own choices. The admission hung between us, startling in its vulnerability. This wasn't the Madison I knew, or thought I knew. This was someone more complex, more human than the competitive force I'd defined her as for years. I don't have it all figured out, I said after a moment. Horizon could still fail. I still wake up at 3 a.m. wondering if I've made a catastrophic mistake. But you're following your conscience, she countered. That's what I'm struggling with at Reynolds. The gap between what we claim to stand for and what we actually prioritize. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at me. Are you considering leaving? She looked down at her coffee. I don't know. It's not that simple for me. I have stock options vesting next year, a team that depends on me, a reputation built entirely within that world. I understand, I said, and I did. The golden handcuffs were real. The identities we built around our professional roles were not easily disentangled. But I am making small stands where I can, she continued. Like warning you about the global impact approach, using my position to push for more ethical practices internally. A wry smile touched her lips. Baby steps toward having a conscience. Better late than never, I teased gently. To my surprise, she laughed. A genuine sound I hadn't heard from her in years. God, we're a mess, aren't we? You, the reluctant entrepreneur. Me, the corporate success having an ethical crisis. At least it's not boring, I offered, smiling despite myself. We talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily than it had in perhaps our entire adult lives. She asked genuine questions about Horizon, about Portland, about the challenges of building something from scratch. I found myself answering honestly, without the defensive filter I usually applied to her inquiries. When it was time for me to catch my train, we walked together to the station. The awkwardness returned. Slightly as we approached the departure gate, neither of us quite sure how to conclude this unexpected reconnection. Emily, Madison said finally, I know one conversation doesn't erase years of whatever we've been to each other, but I'm glad we had it. Me too, I admitted, though I'm still half convinced this is an elaborate setup for some new competition. She laughed again, this time with a hint of sadness. Fair enough. I haven't exactly earned your trust. Not yet, I agreed, but this is a start. We hugged briefly, still stiff, but less coldly formal than before. As I boarded the train, I glanced back to see her still standing there, an unreadable expression on her face. I waved once, and she returned the gesture before turning away, disappearing back into the Seattle I'd left behind. On the train ride south, I replayed the events of the past 24 hours. The presentation that had gone better than expected. The brief, satisfying encounter with Marcus. The surprisingly genuine connection with Madison. None of it fit neatly into the narrative I'd constructed about my sister, my former workplace, or my departure from Seattle. The realization was both unsettling and liberating. Perhaps the clean break I'd imagined when leaving for Portland wasn't actually so clean. Perhaps the relationships and dynamics I thought I'd left behind were more complicated, more capable of evolution than I'd allowed for. By the time the train pulled into Portland, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the Willamette River. I walked from the station to my apartment, the familiar streets of my new city welcoming me back with their quirky shops and graceful old trees. The weight of Seattle, its memories, its wounds, its unresolved questions, slowly lifted with each block. Tomorrow I would return to the hub, continue building Horizon, wait for Global Impact's decision with whatever grace I could muster. But tonight, I simply existed in this moment of possibility, where a sister could surprise me, a presentation could exceed expectations, and the future remained gloriously, terrifyingly unwritten. 3 days passed with no word from Global Impact. Alliance. I tried to focus on other projects, responding to inquiries from smaller nonprofits, finalizing deliverables for existing clients, updating Horizon's portfolio with recent work. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the Seattle presentation, analyzing every question, every response, every nuance of body language from the evaluation committee. On Thursday afternoon, I was at the hub, headphones on, deep in code for a food bank visualization project, when a hand tapped my shoulder. I looked up to find Eli, the documentary filmmaker, grinning down at me. "Your phone's been buzzing for like 5 minutes straight," he said. "Might be important." I pulled off my headphones and grabbed my phone from where I'd tucked it under. A stack of notes, 5 missed calls from a Seattle number. My heart rate doubled instantly. "Thanks," I told Eli, already moving toward the small phone booth areas the hub provided for private calls. Inside the soundproofed glass cube, I returned the call, trying to control my breathing. 3 rings, then a crisp, professional voice. "Global Impact Alliance, Diane Okafor's office." "This is Emily Chen, returning a call," I said, striving for calm professionalism despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "One moment, Ms. Chen. I'll connect you." A brief silence, then Diane's warm voice. "Emily, thank you for calling back. I hope I'm not interrupting your afternoon." "Not at all," I assured her, fingers tightening around the phone. "What can I do for you?" "Well," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "You can tell me when you're available to begin work on our data visualization overhaul. The board approved Horizon Solutions proposal this morning. We'd like to move forward as soon as possible." The world seemed to pause momentarily, sound fading as her words registered. You're accepting our proposal?" I managed. "Enthusiastically," Diane confirmed. "Your approach to data ownership and ethical considerations aligned perfectly with our values. And frankly, your commitment to direct involvement throughout the project was a significant factor in our decision." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by a wave of vindication and relief so powerful it made me dizzy. "I'm honored," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And excited to get started. Thank you for this opportunity." "The honor is ours," Diane replied. "I'll have our legal team send over the contract today. We'd like to schedule a kickoff meeting next week if that works for your timeline." We discussed logistics briefly, project scope, initial milestones, communication protocols, my mind still reeling from the news. By the time we ended the call, I had the broad outlines of a plan and a date for our first official working session. I sat in the phone booth for a long moment after hanging up, letting the reality sink in. Horizon Solutions had just landed its largest contract to date. A prestigious international nonprofit had chosen my small company over established competitors, like Reynolds. The runway I'd been so anxiously watching extend from weeks to months, possibly a year or more of stability. More than the financial implications, though, was the validation. The confirmation that walking away from TechForward, starting over, building something aligned with my values, it hadn't been a foolish impulse or a self-destructive reaction to being fired. It had been the right choice. I stepped out of the phone booth and returned to my desk, trying to contain the emotions threatening to overflow. Eli glanced up, took one look at my face, and raised an eyebrow in question. "Good news?" he asked. "The best," I confirmed, unable to keep the grin from spreading across my face. "Just landed the Global Impact Alliance contract." His eyes widened. The International Aid Organization. That's massive, Emily. Congratulations. Words spread quickly through the hub's communal workspace. By late afternoon, I had received congratulations from most of the regulars, along with an impromptu invitation to celebrate at a nearby brewery. I texted Jessica the news, received an all-caps response and a promise to visit Portland soon to properly toast Horizon's success. Then I hesitated, thumb hovering over my contact list. Did I tell Madison? Our coffee conversation had felt like a tentative truce, possibly even the beginning of a new, more authentic relationship. But she worked for Reynolds, the company I'd just beaten out for this contract. Would she see my success as rubbing salt in the wound? Before I could decide, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from her. Just heard the news. Congratulations, Emily, you earned it. I stared at the message, surprised both by its promptness and its apparent sincerity. No passive-aggressive undertone, no backhanded compliment, no immediately following request for details she could report back to Reynolds. Just straightforward acknowledgement of my achievement. I typed back, "Thank you. Your insights made a difference." Her response came quickly. "Your presentation did that. I just pointed out what you already knew to emphasize." Another text followed. Immediately. "Victor is not pleased, though. Brace for potential pushback. Will explain more when I can." That cryptic warning cast a slight shadow over my elation. What kind of pushback? What had Madison heard? I considered asking for clarification, but something told me she wouldn't have been deliberately vague if she could safely say more via text. I pushed the concern aside, determined not to let it diminish this moment. Whatever Reynolds might do, today, Horizon Solutions had proven itself a viable competitor in a space dominated by established firms. Today, the path I'd chosen had been validated by professionals I respected. Today was for celebration, not anxiety about potential corporate retaliation. That evening at the brewery, surrounded by fellow entrepreneurs from the hub, I allowed myself to fully embrace the victory. We toasted with local IPAs, shared war stories about client pitches and project challenges, offered advice and encouragement freely. There was none of the guarded competitiveness I'd grown accustomed to at TechForward, where colleagues were always mindful of position and perception. Here, among these independent creators, success was collective, each person's wins, expanding the horizon of possibility for everyone. Mia, a UX designer who'd gone independent around the same time I had, clinked her glass against mine. To imposter syndrome's worst nightmare, actual, verifiable success. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. I'm not sure imposter syndrome ever fully goes away. Now I'm just worried about how to actually deliver everything I promised. You will, she said confidently. That's the difference between people who make it solo and people who don't. The former worry they can't do it but do it anyway. The latter use the worry as an excuse not to try. Her words resonated, reminding me of the Emily who'd existed before. TechForward, before professional setbacks, before I'd started measuring my worth through external validation. The student who'd stayed up all night coding because she loved watching data transform into visual stories. The intern who'd fearlessly pitched ideas to senior executives because she believed in their merit. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost touch with that version of myself. Portland, Horizon, this contract, they were helping me find her again. The celebration wound down around 10, people drifting off to catch buses or bikes home. I walked back to my apartment through the mild spring evening, the streets vibrant with the energy that made Portland feel simultaneously smaller and more alive than Seattle. Street musicians played on corners, food carts still served late night. Snacks, couples and friends spilled out of restaurants onto patios lit by string lights. As I approached my building, a figure detached itself from the shadows near the entrance. I tensed momentarily, then recognized the silhouette. "Jessica?" I called, surprised and delighted. "What are you doing here?" My best friend stepped into the light, grinning widely. Did you really think I'd just send a text when you landed the biggest contract of your career? I caught the evening train down. We hugged tightly, Jessica's familiar perfume and unconditional support enveloping me. You're insane, I murmured into her shoulder. Don't you have work tomorrow? Remote day, she said dismissively, pulling back to examine me. You're glowing, Em. Success looks good on you. Inside my apartment, we opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and settled on the couch, catching up properly for the first time in weeks. Jessica had been promoted at her tech consulting firm, was dating someone new who seemed promising, had finally adopted the rescue dog she'd been talking about for years. Enough about my boring Seattle life, she said, refilling our glasses. Tell me everything about the presentation. Did you have to face down your old boss? Was it as satisfying as I imagine? I described the trip in detail, the preparation, the presentation itself, the brief encounter with Marcus in the elevator. Jessica listened intently, asking questions, celebrating each small victory within the larger success. When I mentioned the dinner and coffee with Madison, however, her expression grew skeptical. So your sister, who filmed you being escorted out of TechForward and shared it for family entertainment, suddenly develops a conscience and decides to help you? She raised an eyebrow. That doesn't strike you as suspicious? I sighed, swirling. The wine in my glass. Of course it does, but her warning about Reynolds's data practices was accurate. It made a tangible difference in my presentation. Maybe, Jessica allowed. Or maybe she told you what global impact was already concerned about, knowing you'd emphasize it, making you seem like you were following their lead rather than setting the agenda. Classic corporate strategy. Let your competitor think they're winning while you're positioning for the long game. The suggestion sent an uncomfortable chill through me. Was it possible Madison's apparent change of heart was actually a more sophisticated form of manipulation? Had I been naive to accept her help, her congratulations, her seeming evolution? You think I'm being played, I said flatly. Jessica's expression softened. I think your sister has a lifetime track record of competitive behavior, and suddenly seems to be changing right when you're both circling the same major client. It's worth being cautious, that's all. She seemed genuinely conflicted about Reynolds's ethics, I argued, though doubt had already taken root. And she warned me that Victor wasn't happy about losing the contract. Which could be true and still serve her purposes, Jessica pointed out. The best manipulations always contain elements of truth. I set down my wine glass, suddenly tired. So what's your theory? That she's playing some long con? To what end? Reynolds still lost the contract. I don't know, Jessica admitted. Maybe it's about positioning herself as the reasonable one. If Reynolds decides to pursue more aggressive tactics, maybe it's about gathering intelligence on your approach for future competitions. Maybe it's simply about maintaining some control over the narrative. The possibilities swirled uncomfortably. I wanted to believe Madison's overtures were genuine, that our relationship could evolve beyond the toxic competition that had defined it for so long. But Jessica wasn't wrong about the timing being convenient, about Madison's history of calculating behavior. You know I'm just looking out for you, right? Jessica said gently. After everything you've been through, I hate the idea of you getting hurt again. I know, I assured her. And I appreciate it. I'm not exactly trusting Madison completely, just trying to stay open to the possibility that people can change. Jessica smiled. That's one of the things I love most about you, Em. Even after everything, you haven't become cynical. Yet, I quipped, trying to lighten the mood. We stayed up late, talking about everything and nothing, the way only friends with decades of shared history can. Jessica had been there through every major moment of my adult life: college all-nighters, first heartbreaks, professional triumphs and setbacks. Her presence now, on this pivotal day, felt right. Necessary. She left the next morning with promises to return soon, to help celebrate when the Global Impact Project officially launched. I waved from my building's entrance until her rideshare disappeared around the corner, then turned back inside, mind already shifting to the work ahead. The contract arrived by courier that afternoon. 30 pages of legal language outlining expectations, deliverables, timelines, and compensation. I reviewed it carefully, paying particular attention to the sections on data ownership and usage rights. As promised, Global Impact retained full control of their data and any insights derived from it. Horizon's role was clearly defined as service provider, not data broker. I signed with a feeling of profound satisfaction, not just at the terms, but at what they represented, an alignment of values between client and provider, a shared understanding of ethical boundaries in an industry often lacking them. The following Monday, I boarded the train to Seattle for our kickoff meeting. The familiar landscape rolled past my window. Evergreen forests, glimpses of Puget Sound, distant mountains framing the horizon. I'd made this journey countless times, but today felt different. I wasn't returning as a refugee from corporate disappointment. I was arriving as the CEO of a company that had earned its place at the table. Global Impact's offices were as impressive as I remembered. Sleek, professional, overlooking Elliott Bay with floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with natural light. But this time, instead of being shown to an interview room as a nervous vendor, I was escorted to their main conference suite as a partner. The distinction was subtle but significant. In the questions asked, the deference shown, the assumption of expertise rather than the need to prove it. Diane introduced me to the expanded project team, technical leads, program managers, communications specialists who would be working closely with Horizon over the coming months. We spent the morning outlining goals, establishing communication protocols, and identifying key stakeholders. After lunch, we dove into the technical details: existing data architecture, visualization needs for different audiences, integration, requirements for current systems. By late afternoon, we had a solid project plan and had scheduled our first working sessions. The team's enthusiasm was palpable, their relief at having found a partner who understood both their technical needs and ethical priorities evident in every interaction. As the meeting wound down, Diane pulled me aside. "I wanted to thank you again for your approach to this project, Emily. You should know that your emphasis on data ownership was what ultimately tipped the scales in your favor. One of our other finalists had concerning language buried in their contract regarding derived insights that our legal team flagged." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the confirmation of Madison's warning. Data ethics is fundamental to Horizon's philosophy. I believe nonprofits deserve the same protection and respect for their information that for-profit entities demand. Exactly, she agreed warmly. That alignment is why I'm so confident in this partnership. We parted with handshakes all around, the Global Impact team clearly energized by the day's progress. I left their offices feeling a complex mixture of emotions, professional pride, validation, excitement about the work ahead, but also a lingering unease about Jessica's warnings regarding Madison and Reynolds. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "In town for meetings. Dinner? There's more you should know." I hesitated. The kickoff had gone well, the contract was signed, the project was moving forward. Did I need to subject myself to potential corporate intrigue or familial mind games? But curiosity won out, as it often did with Madison. If there was information that might affect Horizon or the Global Impact Project, I needed to hear it. "Rico's at 7?" I suggested, naming a small Mexican restaurant that was unlikely to be frequented by either Global Impact or Reynolds employees. "Perfect," she replied. "See you then." Rico's was tucked away on a side street in Capitol Hill, known more for its authentic food than its ambiance. The dim lighting and booth seating offered privacy, while the constant backdrop of kitchen noise made conversation difficult to overhear. I arrived first, selecting a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Madison arrived precisely at 7, dressed more casually than I was accustomed to seeing her. Dark jeans, a simple blouse, minimal jewelry. She looked tired, the polished corporate veneer noticeably absent. "Thanks for meeting," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "How was the kickoff?" "Productive," I replied, studying her. "The team seems engaged and aligned on priorities." She nodded, glancing at the menu without really seeing it. "Good. That's good." Our server appeared. And we ordered drinks, a margarita for me, just water for Madison, which was unusual enough to raise my concern. My sister typically matched me drink for drink, if not outpacing me. "Everything okay?" I asked once the server had gone. "You seem off." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's one way to put it. I've had an interesting week since Global Impact announced their decision." "Victor's not pleased," I said, recalling her text. "Understatement," she confirmed, absently rearranging the silverware in front of her. "He called an emergency executive meeting the day after the announcement. I've never seen him so," she searched for the word, "personally invested in losing a contract." It went beyond professional disappointment. The server returned with our drinks. We ordered food quickly, eager to return to the conversation. Once we were alone again, Madison leaned forward, voice lowered. "Emily, there's something you need to understand about the Global Impact contract. It wasn't just about the services or the revenue. Reynolds wanted their data, specifically their refugee demographic information and aid distribution patterns." I frowned. "For what purpose?" "They're developing predictive analytics for a defense contractor," she said bluntly. "Modeling population movements in conflict zones." A cold weight settled in my stomach. They were going to use humanitarian aid data for military applications, without disclosure or consent? Madison nodded grimly. Behind layers of subsidiaries and partnerships, but yes. The Global Impact data was particularly valuable because of its comprehensiveness and granularity. And because it was collected for humanitarian purposes, it contains information people might be more reluctant to share in other contexts. The ethical implications were staggering. Global Impact Alliance worked with vulnerable populations in crisis situations, refugees, disaster survivors, communities affected by conflict or extreme poverty. People who shared information believing it would be used to help them, not to, develop technologies that might ultimately be deployed against similar populations. I trailed off, searching for words strong enough. Exploitative? Unethical? Potentially illegal under international humanitarian law? Madison supplied. Yes, to all of the above. And the reason I'm telling you this is that Victor isn't simply disappointed about losing the contract. He's actively looking for ways to undermine Horizon's relationship with Global Impact. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, tension creeping into my shoulders. "It means watch your back," she said seriously. "Reynolds has resources you don't. Legal teams, PR firms, industry connections. They're discussing ways to question Horizon's capacity, to suggest you overpromised capabilities, to create doubt about your ability to deliver." Our food arrived, though neither of us seemed particularly interested in eating now. I pushed rice around my plate, mind racing with implications. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked, the question that had been hovering since our first dinner conversation. "You're still a Reynolds executive. This could be seen as corporate sabotage." Madison set down her fork and met my gaze directly. "Because there are lines I won't cross anymore. Because watching you build something with integrity made me question what I've been building. Because..." She hesitated, then continued more quietly. "Because you're my sister, and that should have mattered more to me than it has." The sincerity in her voice was difficult to dismiss. This wasn't the calculated, competitive Madison I'd grown accustomed to. This was someone wrestling with genuine ethical concerns, someone questioning previously unexamined choices. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She shook her head slightly. "I don't know yet. I've started documenting everything, the meetings, the strategies being discussed, the real intentions behind certain projects, creating a record just in case." "In case of what?" "In case I need to be a whistleblower," she said, the words clearly difficult to voice. "In case the situation escalates beyond what I can address internally." The gravity of that statement hung between us. For Madison, always the perfect corporate soldier, always the one who followed rules and exceeded expectations, to even consider whistleblowing represented a seismic shift in her worldview. "That's a significant risk," I said carefully, "to your career, your reputation." "I know," she replied, a flicker of her old confidence returning. "But it's a calculated one. Unlike you, I'm not ready to walk away and start over. I still believe I can affect more change from within the system than outside it. For now, at least." I studied my sister, seeing her perhaps more clearly than I ever had before, not as the perfect achiever I'd resented, nor as the calculating competitor I'd feared, but as a complex person navigating her own ethical awakening, constrained by choices and commitments I hadn't had to consider in my cleaner break. "What should I do about global impact?" I asked. "Should I warn them about Reynolds' intentions for their data?" Madison considered this. "The contract is signed, and you've already indirectly addressed the issue through your data ownership provisions. Raising specific allegations now, without concrete evidence I can publicly provide, might seem like competitor mudslinging. It could undermine your professional credibility right when you need it most." She was right, I realized. Making accusations about Reynolds' intentions without documentation I could share would appear self-serving at best, paranoid at worst. "Focus on delivering exceptional work," Madison advised. "That's your best defense against whatever Reynolds might try. Meanwhile, I'll continue monitoring from the inside, warning you when I can." I nodded slowly, seeing the wisdom in her approach. "And what about us? This strange new territory we're in?" A small smile touched her lips. "You mean where we're actually talking instead of competing? Where we acknowledge each other as complex humans rather than rivals in some imaginary race?" She shrugged. "I don't know, Emily. I'm as new to this as you are, but I'd like to keep trying." "Even if it means divided loyalties?" I pressed. My loyalty to ethical conduct isn't divided," she said firmly. "And that's what this is ultimately about. Not choosing between you and Reynolds, but between right and wrong." She paused, then added more softly, "Though I won't pretend it isn't. Complicated by the fact that you're my sister, and I've got years of treating you poorly to make up for." The admission wasn't something the old Madison would ever have voiced. It reflected a level of self-awareness and accountability I hadn't previously associated with her. "Baby steps toward having a conscience," I echoed her words from our previous conversation, offering a small smile. "Exactly," she agreed, returning the smile. "Turns out it's a muscle that needs regular exercise." We finished our meals, the conversation shifting to less heavy topics: parents' retirement plans, mutual childhood friends, Madison's tentative exploration of potential career paths should she ultimately need to leave Reynolds. By the time we said goodbye outside the restaurant, the tension that had defined our relationship for so long had evolved into something more nuanced. Not quite friendship, not quite sisterhood as conventionally defined, but a wary alliance founded on newfound respect and shared ethical concerns. Back at my hotel, I reviewed my notes from the Global Impact kickoff, adding follow-up items and questions for our next meeting. But my mind kept returning to Madison's warnings. If Reynolds was truly planning to undermine Horizon's relationship, with Global Impact, I needed to be prepared, not just with excellent work, but with contingency plans for various forms of corporate interference. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything: the timeline of the proposal process, the specific questions asked during the presentation, the terms emphasized in the final contract. Creating my own record, just as Madison was doing at I. Reynolds. Not out of paranoia, but prudence; not out of fear, but foresight. As I worked into the night, a strange sense of calm settled over me. 6 months ago, the prospect of corporate retaliation would have terrified me, made me question my decision to leave the security of established employment. Now, it simply reinforced the rightness of that choice. If companies like Reynolds were willing to go to such lengths to access data they had no ethical right to use, then building an alternative guided by different principles wasn't just a career path, it was a necessary counterbalance. I closed my laptop around midnight and stood by the hotel window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in those gleaming towers, decisions were being made in boardrooms that would affect real people's lives, often without their knowledge or consent. The power imbalance was vast, the ethical guardrails often flimsy or non-existent. But now I was building something different. Something that recognized the humanity behind the data points, the trust implicit in sharing personal information, the responsibility that came with that trust. It wasn't just about creating beautiful visualizations or efficient systems. It was about how those tools were used, whose interests they served, whose voices they amplified or silenced. As I turned away from the window, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges Reynolds might create, whatever obstacles emerged, the path forward was clear. Not easy, certainly not safe, but unquestionably right. And for the first time in my professional life, that alignment between values and work felt like the only true measure of success worth pursuing. The annual Reynolds Innovations Gala was the tech industry's most anticipated event in Seattle, transforming the grand ballroom at the summit into a showcase of power, influence, and carefully curated opulence. I adjusted my simple black dress, a stark contrast to the designer gowns glittering under crystal chandeliers, and wondered again why I had accepted Victor Reynolds's unexpected invitation. "Ms. Chen, welcome." The man himself appeared at my elbow, silver-haired and imperious in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. "I'm pleased you could join us." "Thank you for the invitation," I replied, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server. Though I admit I was surprised to receive it. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We like to gather innovative minds, regardless of company size or status. Your work with global impact has attracted attention." 3 months had passed since the kickoff meeting. Horizon Solutions had delivered the first phase of visualizations on schedule, earning enthusiastic feedback from Global Impact's board. We'd expanded to a team of 5, moved to proper offices, and started fielding inquiries from other international nonprofits interested in similar services. Success had arrived faster than I'd dared hope, bringing with it new challenges and unexpected opportunities, including this bizarre invitation to my competitor's gala, hand-delivered to Horizon's offices with a personal note from Victor Reynolds. "Global Impact seems pleased with our progress," I acknowledged neutrally, scanning the room for Madison. She had texted earlier, warning me that Victor's invitation wasn't a peace offering, but didn't elaborate further. "Indeed." Victor swirled his champagne thoughtfully. "Though I wonder if they fully understand the technological limitations of your approach. We've heard concerns about scalability." And there it was, the first subtle undermining, just as Madison had warned. "From whom exactly?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Because Global Impact's technical team has been quite satisfied with our architecture decisions." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "The industry has standards, Ms. Chen. Experience suggests that boutique operations often struggle to maintain them when projects expand in scope." "Perhaps," I conceded with a small smile. "But I've found that ethical considerations sometimes matter more to clients than technical orthodoxy. particularly when sensitive data is involved. His eyes narrowed slightly. Before he could respond, we were interrupted by a young woman in a Reynolds corporate communications badge. "Mr. Reynolds, the press has arrived for your statement." He nodded, then turned back to me. "Enjoy the evening, Ms. Chen. We should continue this conversation later." As he moved away, I exhaled slowly, scanning the room again for Madison. Instead, I spotted James Chen, Global Impact's technology director, near the bar. I made my way toward him, surprised to see a client at what was essentially a competitor's event. "Emily," he greeted me warmly. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Likewise," I replied. "I thought Global Impact was hosting its own fundraiser tonight." James lowered his voice. "We are. Most of the team is there. I was specifically invited here to discuss potential collaborations with Reynolds." Seemed oddly insistent. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. "What kind of collaborations?" They were vague, but mentioned data integration possibilities that could enhance our current visualization system. He shrugged. "I came out of curiosity more than interest. Your team's work has been exactly what we needed." I nodded, mind racing. This wasn't just undermining through innuendo. Reynolds was directly approaching my client, suggesting improvements to work that had barely launched. "I appreciate your transparency, James, and your confidence in Horizon." "You've earned it," he said simply. "Speaking of which, I should probably make an appearance at our actual event. Just wanted to see what Reynolds was up to." After he departed, I moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom, pulling out my phone to text Madison. Before I could, an alert popped up. A news notification from Seattle Tech Daily. "Reynolds Innovations announces major defense contract for predictive population analytics." I clicked through to the article, heart pounding. The press release described Reynolds' new partnership with Meridian Defense Systems to develop advanced predictive analytics for population movement patterns in sensitive regions. No mention of where the training data would come from, but the implications were clear. "Now you understand why I was concerned." Madison's voice came from behind me. I turned to find my sister, elegant in dark blue, expression grim. They found another source for similar data. Not as comprehensive as Global Impact's, but sufficient for the first phase. This is what the gala is really celebrating, I realized. Not innovation, but military contracts. She nodded. Victor wanted Global Impact's representatives here to see it, to recognize the prestige and funding they're missing by choosing a boutique operation over an industry leader with defense connections. "A pressure tactic," I said, pieces falling into place. "Make them question their decision by showcasing Reynolds' resources and reach." Exactly. Madison glanced toward the front of the room, where Victor was now speaking to a cluster of reporters. "There's more. Reynolds has prepared a detailed analysis of Horizon's technical approach, identifying theoretical weaknesses and limitations. They're planning to present it to Global Impact as a professional courtesy after tonight's announcement." The calculated nature of the attack was breathtaking. Not direct sabotage, but the careful planting of doubts, the leveraging of institutional credibility to undermine a smaller competitor. "Why?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "Global Impact is one client. Important, yes, but hardly essential for a company Reynolds' size." Madison's expression darkened. "It's not about the client anymore. It's about you. About making an example of what happens when someone challenges Reynolds' dominance in a space they want to control." She hesitated. "And if I'm being honest, it's become somewhat personal for Victor. The fact that you're my sister adds a dimension he finds intriguing." The implications sent a chill through me. This wasn't just business competition. It was becoming a vendetta, with my fledgling company caught in the crosshairs of a corporate giant with virtually unlimited resources. "What do you suggest?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the anxiety building within me. Madison straightened her shoulders, a familiar determination in her stance. I suggest we change the narrative. Right now. She led me toward the small stage where Victor had just concluded his remarks to enthusiastic applause. As we approached, he turned, surprise briefly crossing his features before his professional mask reasserted itself. Madison, I was just looking for you. The Meridian executives are eager to discuss project timelines. In a moment, she replied smoothly. First, I believe you promised to continue your conversation with Emily. Victor's smile tightened. Perhaps later would be more appropriate. Actually, Madison interrupted, something I'd never seen her do to her boss before. I think now is perfect, especially since it relates to your announcement. A subtle shift occurred in the energy around us, conversation quieting as people sensed potential drama unfolding. Victor's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. What exactly are you suggesting, Madison? Transparency, she stated simply, reaching into her clutch to remove a small flash drive. About the actual sources of the data being used for the Meridian project, about the ethical implications, about the attempts to undermine a competitor who prioritized client data ownership over exploitation. The color drained from Victor's face as he recognized the implied threat. This isn't the venue for internal discussions, Madison. We can address any concerns you have tomorrow, in private. I've tried that approach for months, she replied, voice steady but resolute. The concerns aren't just internal anymore. Not when they affect clients like Global Impact Alliance, who deserve to know how their data would have been used had they chosen Reynolds. Victor's eyes darted around the room, noting the interested observers, including several technology journalists. You're making serious allegations without context, Madison. Consider the implications for your career. I have, she assured him. Extensively. Which is why I've already shared this documentation with the Ethics in Technology Commission. She gestured with the flash drive. This is just a courtesy copy, so you know exactly what they received. The strategic brilliance of Madison's move slowly dawned on me. She hadn't just gathered evidence, she'd already acted on it, placing it with an independent ethics body that would investigate regardless of any pressure Reynolds might apply. And she'd chosen this public moment not out of vindictiveness, but to create witnesses who would notice any subsequent retaliation. Victor's expression shifted through several emotions: shock, anger, calculation, and finally a cold pragmatism. We should discuss this privately, he said, voice lowered. Both of you. Now. Madison glanced at me, a silent question in her eyes. I nodded slightly. Whatever came next, we would face it together. We followed Victor to a small executive conference room off the main ballroom. As the door closed behind us, he turned, professional veneer cracking to reveal genuine anger. Do you have any idea what you've done? He demanded of Madison. Years of strategic positioning, millions in R&D, relationships cultivated across sectors, all potentially compromised because you suddenly developed ethical qualms? They're not sudden, Madison replied calmly. They've been building since I realized how Reynolds actually operates behind its innovation rhetoric. The global impact situation was simply the catalyst that made silence no longer an option. Victor turned to me, eyes cold. And you, this is your influence, isn't it? Turning my best executive against me because you couldn't compete on merit alone. I met his gaze steadily. Madison makes her own decisions, always has. In fact, she warned me about Reynolds' intentions toward global impact before I even knew. Reynolds was competing for the contract. So this betrayal has been months in the making, he concluded bitterly. It's not betrayal to uphold ethical standards, Madison countered. It's not betrayal to question practices that exploit vulnerable populations' data without consent. It's not betrayal to expect better from a company that claims to be defining the future of technology. Victor was quiet for a moment, calculating. What exactly do you want? Money? A position at Reynolds for your sister? Name your price. The crudeness of the offer was almost laughable. Madison shook her head slowly. What I want is reform. Transparent data practices. Ethical guidelines with actual enforcement mechanisms. Client ownership of their information as a standard, not an exception. Idealism doesn't drive shareholder value, Victor dismissed. Neither do ethics investigations and client exodus, I pointed out, which is what you're facing if this continues publicly. Victor's eyes narrowed as he reassessed the situation. You're suggesting there's a path forward that doesn't involve the Ethics Commission release? They already have the documentation, Madison clarified. But whether they need to launch a formal investigation depends on Reynolds' response. A proactive ethics overhaul, new transparent data policies, and a commitment to respecting client data ownership could position this as Reynolds leading industry reform rather than being forced into it. I watched my sister with newfound admiration. Even now, facing down her boss and risking her career, she was thinking strategically, offering a solution that could salvage both corporate interests and ethical principles. Victor was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating costs and benefits with the precision that had built Reynolds into an industry leader. Finally, he spoke. I'll need to consult the board. This isn't a unilateral decision. Of course, Madison agreed. But I suggest acting quickly. The commission reviews new cases every Monday. He nodded curtly, already reaching for his phone. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow, Madison, with legal present. He glanced at me. Ms. Chen, I believe our business is concluded. It was as close to a concession as we were likely to get. Madison and I exited the conference room, maintaining professional composure until we reached the relative privacy of a quiet hallway. Did that just happen? I asked, adrenaline still coursing through me. A small, genuine smile crossed Madison's face. It did. And while tomorrow will be brutal, I don't regret it. What will you do if Reynolds doesn't reform? If they terminate you instead? She squared her shoulders, a familiar determination in her posture. Then I start over. Perhaps not with quite your flair for dramatic exits, but with the same commitment to building something that aligns with my values. The absolute certainty in her voice was something I recognized, not from our years of competition, but from within myself. The clarity that comes from making choices based on principles rather than fear or external validation. For what it's worth, I said quietly, starting over is terrifying, but it's also the most liberating thing I've ever done. Madison nodded, understanding flickering between us. Maybe that's the next chapter of the Chen sisters' story, building something together instead of competing. The possibility hung in, the air between us. Not a commitment, not yet, but a doorway neither of us had previously considered might exist. Whatever came next, whether Reynolds reformed or resisted, whether Madison stayed or left, whether Horizon and Global Impact weathered the corporate storm intact, something fundamental had shifted. Not just in our professional landscapes, but in the way we saw each other and ourselves. As we rejoined the gala, heads held high under the curious gazes of Seattle's tech elite, I realized that success looked different than I'd once imagined. It wasn't measured in corporate titles or client lists or even contract values. It lived in the alignment between values and actions, in the courage to stand for principles even when costly, in the willingness to rewrite narratives that no longer serve truth. And sometimes, most surprisingly, it could be found in the sister who had once felt like your greatest rival, becoming your strongest ally, standing beside you as you both faced an uncertain but authentic future. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.